Okay, so as I was saying, a sine or a cosine function, it kind of is. It should always be written in this format. Sometimes some things will be there, sometimes other things won't. So A, B, C, and D are pieces of the function that let you graph it. You know, they do different things to your graph. You should know the general graph for a sine function and the general graph for a cosine function. Okay. But then the A, the B, the C, and the D, they do different things to that. A is the amplitude. That's the distance from the midline to the height, or the midline to the lowest point on the graph. So not the height, excuse me, the highest point on the graph or the lowest point in the graph. Frequency. Frequency is how many times you can get a complete cycle between 0 and 2 pi on your graph. Phase shift. That's you move the graph either to the left or to the right, and then vertical shift is moving the graph up or down. All right. So that translates into stuff like this. So this frequency is 2 because I've got 2 complete cycles between 0 and 2 pi. This frequency is 2. Excuse me, is 1 because I've got 1 complete cosine cycle between 0 and 2 pi. Even though they try to trick us a little bit because they've got 2 cycles here, what I'm looking at is how many cycles I got between 0 and 2 pi. There's only 1. Right here, between 0 and 2 pi, I only have half a cycle. So the frequency is 1/2. All right, this is a sine graph. So that's half the cycle. So the frequency is 1/2. And then like right here, this graph is 1 complete cycle between 0 and 2 pi. But this one, the graph is negative, and so it's a reflection. All right, so now that takes us back to up top to where we're looking at the equation and we're pulling out each of these pieces, right? So um, if there's no number in front of your sine or cosine function, then the amplitude is 1. All right, so the amplitude is 1 here. So the amplitude is 1. So the amplitude is 1. Next, the 1/2, the 1/2 is the frequency. So that 1/2 tells us that only between 0 and 2 pi, it's only half a cycle. So because it's only half a cycle between 0 and 2 pi, to get 1 complete cycle, that's what the period is. Even though the period is not part of our little equation here, period is important. And you find the period by taking 2 pi and dividing it by the frequency. So the frequency on this is 1/2. 2 pi divided by 1/2. What kind of graph is that, or what kind of problem is that? 2 pi divided by 1/2. It's a keep change flip problem. I'm dividing by a fraction, so I got to keep change flip. So that's where I get 4 pi from. 4 pi. This there's no reflection because my sine or my cosine function isn't negative. Over here, though, number 7 is negative. So this will be a reflection. And if it's asking about reflection, it's just a yes or no. Yes. Yes. Yes, sir. Yep. Keep change flip. 2 pi times 2. So, and then here I want you to notice this first um, equation has -4. This second equation has parentheses x minus pi over 4. When it's in parentheses, with my x like this, that's where the phase shift comes, the left or right movement. The -4 or the +3 on number 7, that's a vertical shift. That's a vertical movement, up or down. Okay. Anybody got any questions on that? Looking at the equation and pulling out pieces of it that you need. What question you got, sir? Then speak. Okay, just playing. Yeah. So now that's the first thing is you need to be able to look at an equation and pull out pieces. Now, I mean, my fault. And besides just pulling out pieces, you also need to be able to rewrite the equation. So that's the next thing we're going to do. Okay, so say it again, ma'am. Okay. So in this case, now we need to look at a graph. So we're looking at a graph and we need to pull out pieces so we can write the equation. So in this case, my frequency is 2 and my from the midline to the height or the high point of the graph is 3. So that's my amplitude. And since the frequency is 2, 2 pi divided by 2, the period is pi. Then I can write my equation. I always suggest that you write the frequency down because the frequency actually goes into the equation. The period does not. You use the frequency to find your period, you know, or in this case, you're looking at a graph. You just need to look at, well, how long does it take to get one complete cycle? Well, I colored them different for that reason. So you can see up, that one ends at pi. So that's my period, pi. But I write my graph, y equals the amplitude times sine of the frequency times x. Boom. I do the same thing over here. In this case, from the midline to the highest point of my graph, my is 4, so my amplitude is 4. The period, as I can see from this picture, is 2 pi. One complete cycle from 0 to 2 pi happens. So that means the frequency is 1. So here's my graph or my equation. Y equals 4, the amplitude, times cosine. The frequency is 1, so 1 times x. So then I've got this one that's got a frequency of a half. So that, see here, is where that half goes. I've got an amplitude of 2, so y equals 2 sine 1/2 of x. My period is 2 pi divided by 1/2, which is 4 pi. And then in this graph, remember the graph of cosine looks like a weird V or a U, like a cursive V. So because this looks like that, but it's flipped, that's a reflection. A reflection tells me that my equation is negative. So y equals negative. Then I look at my amplitude. My amplitude from the midline to the highest point is 5. So y equals -5. We said this was a cosine graph. And then the frequency, well, between 0 and 2 pi, I've got one cycle. So the frequency is 1. So that's where I get y equals -5 cosine x squared. Or excuse me, x. Sorry. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, that's not for you. But this is. Now you need to be able to take an equation and draw the graph. Yes. Did we do what before that? Those? No, I was coming down to that. So these two graphs, you need to be able to understand that the 3 is amplitude. So that's from the midline to the highest point and the midline to the lowest point. This second number, that is the frequency. So that tells me that I should have 2 complete cycles for a sine between 0 and 2 pi. And sure enough, here is one cycle, and then there's the second cycle. You need to make sure that you're watching this. These instructions say you need to sketch the graph over the interval -2 pi to +2 pi. That means you got to go all the way back here and make it all the way there. So if you only give me half the graph, you only get half the credit. All right, you need to go all the way back. And then we did the same thing here with cosine. 4, that's my amplitude. So it's got the highest point is 4 and the lowest point is -4. And then 2 is my frequency. So again, I've got two weird V's between 0 and 2 pi. So anybody got any questions on that? Okay. That would be a question. What? Hmm. Neither are mine. Mine look horrible. But yeah, you realize I'm recording this, right? Because that's what you asked for. Okay, so now I've got these two graphs. So this graph right here, that dotted line means that my mid line moved. The middle of the graph, it's usually been the x-axis. Well, it moved up 1, 2, 3. So that's telling you I have a vertical shift going up of 3. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing, from the midline to the highest point in the graph, 1, 2. So the amplitude is 2. Now I can tell by the picture what the period is, or I can say, well, wait a minute, 2 pi is somewhere in here. So I know that my period is bigger than 2 pi. It's somewhere right in here. So how do I figure that out? Well, right here. See, one complete cycle goes all the way to 6 pi. So that's my period, but I still need to figure out what my frequency is. So I know that 2 pi divided by the frequency equals 6 pi because I got one complete cycle from 0 to 6 pi. So that's my period. And when I look at this, I need to multiply by 3. 2 pi times 3, but I'm dividing, I'm not multiplying. So if I need to multiply by 3, it's the same as dividing by 1/3. So my frequency is 1/3. Bless you. So now I got the amplitude, the period, and the vertical shift. So now I just follow the y equals a cosine bx minus c plus d. So a is 2, b is 1/3, c is none or 0, and then d is 3. And there's my function. So now I look at this one. So this one. So this one right here is a sine graph, but it's upside down. So because it's upside down or flipped or reversed, it's a reflection. So we got a negative in front of our stuff. So y equals negative, and then I need the amplitude. Well, from the midline to the highest point of the graph is 1/2. So that means my amplitude is 1/2. So y equals -1/2. Like we said, this is a sine graph. And then I need my frequency. Well, I look at my period. One complete cycle goes from 0 to 2 pi over 5. So again, right here, I got 2 pi divided by the frequency equals 2 pi over 5. So that means the frequency is 5. So y equals -1/2 sine 5 of x. Anybody got any questions on that? Okay, last, right here. Let's look at this matching. So with the matching, what I'm telling you is if you get confused about you don't recognize how that graph looks, do the ones that you can figure out off jump, and then the other ones will kind of fall in line. Like for instance, right here, figuring out this graph might be tricky because we haven't done a lot of side to side stuff, a lot of side to side movement. So then maybe you save that one for last. But for instance, like this one, this is the cosine graph -2. That means it's moving downward. That's the only one that moves downward. That's the only graph. That there's the midline or there's the x-axis, but the midline's down here because it moved down. So that's G. This one is a graph that moves up. So again, I look every other one of these, the midline is the x-axis, except for that one and this one. So that tells me that the +1 is that one. So that's 2 right off jump. Then I go to here, and I've got 4 sine, 4 cosine, and 4 sine again. Well, those are the amplitudes. That means that's the highest point. Well, right here, there's the midline. This says 2. Because it says 2 right here is my first hash mark, then that means the second hash mark is 4. So these two have a amplitude of 4. This one has an amplitude of 4, and this one don't. So looking at this, I got 3 with the amplitude of 4. Well, this one is a sine graph. This one is a sine graph. This one is a cosine graph. So then that one is right there. It's got an amplitude of 4 and it's a cosine graph. So now I've got 4 sine 4x and 4 sine 1/4 x. So now I just think about what's the periods, or the frequencies. Well, the frequency for this one is 4. Between 0 and 2 pi, I should be able to fit 4, right? Here, between 0 and 2 pi, I should only be able to fit a fourth of a graph. So I look right here. Well, here's 0 to 2 pi, and it's just one piece. That's just one piece. And then here, here, I don't even see 2 pi because I've got 4 of them that fit in there. So then that's how I know that this one is A and this one is B. And then the last thing I got is I've got cosine with a phase shift and I got sine with the phase shift. So that's this one or this one, moving it to the side or whatever. Well, this one right here has a frequency of what, 2? So I should be able to fit 2 graphs between 0 and 2 pi. This one has a frequency of 1. So I should be able to fit 1 cycle between 0 and 2 pi. Well, from right here, that's 1 cycle. Right here, where's my 2 pi at? So I've got, that's 1 cycle. And it's not 2 pi. So that's how I know that that one's F and that one's D. So you don't, you can do process of elimination to figure these out. If you're having problems just recognizing it. Does anybody have any questions on this?